Oh wow, this episode's actually gonna be pretty diverse. Like, normally I tend to have it in like a theme or like a breakdown of like two topics or some shit, but this episode is actually fairly diverse. So, to try and give it a little bit more of a generalized context, there's a little bit of love, there's a little bit of sex, but for the most part, there is going to be quite a bit of relationship advice, not just the romantic kind. And for those of y'all that might hear something in the background like a drill or anything, there's a bit of construction happening around where I stay, so you might have to bear with that a little bit. Hopefully the instrumental should get rid of most of that. Although, with that said, I don't think that's my biggest issue on this episode. I actually feel like my biggest issue is time, and I'm hoping that I manage to fit everything in and not take up too much time. But speaking of time, I think we can kick things off considering that it is something to do with time. Now, there's a man who was detained somewhere in Peru about 3 weeks ago whose bag was found with an 800-year-old mummy. And the most interesting part is, he claimed that that was his girlfriend. I don't know, this shit sounds crazy as fuck though. Also pretty confusing. Like, this is an 800-year-old mummy. Like, do you call it baby though? Cause it's your girlfriend and shit? Like, I don't know. It seems particularly weird that someone would decide, you know what, I think I'm gonna bag my baddie, literally speaking, and then go across the world with them or some shit. Cause I don't get how the hell any of this makes sense. Although, I'm not gonna lie, when I actually did read this story, I actually died, pun intended. And, you know, for the most part, if you actually get the details, they're even funnier than whatever it is that you think. So, the story says, and I quote, "In Peru, police have detained a man who was carrying around an 800-year-old mummy in a travel bag. When questioned by the authorities, the man claimed her name was Juanita and she was his girlfriend. Scans later found that the body is, in fact, that of a male, a Juan, not a Juanita." End quote. Now, just tell me that this did not give you the nicest plot twist of the entire story. Like, the first plot twist that you get is that, you know, the guy has been carrying around an 800-year-old mummy. And then the fact that he claims that it's his girlfriend. And then the fact that you realize that the mummy isn't even a mummy, it's a daddy. Like, that shit is wild as fuck though. If you actually kind of think about it. Not unless if this guy would say that, you know, he's interested in trans and, you know, the mummy said a couple of years back that, you know, it decided to go for a sex change or it identifies as a woman. Like, I don't know if this guy can manage to get around the entire thing, considering that this guy, like, he must have fought with the authorities and said, "That's my girlfriend, leave my girlfriend alone." And most of these people are like, yo, like, us guys like cougars, we don't mind the MILF here and there, but this is even beyond GILF level. Like, what the fuck is up with this dude? Is it that he's secretly gay and he likes things hard, so he decided to go for a mummy and shit? Or is it that the guy actually missed having a mummy in his life, so he actually decided to go for the actual artifact? I don't know. Either way, it does seem particularly weird, and I hope this guy receives the psychological help that he requires, considering that this shit just seems wild as fuck, weird as fuck, and I don't think this is something that would be done by a normal person. What would be done by a normal person, if they actually liked it, is to listen to this podcast, which I'd have probably given a little bit more life if I didn't start with such a dead story by saying, welcome to Breaktime on West Side, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who feels more alive than ever. Because unlike this dude, the baddies that I can try to bag are still alive. He's a man who still believes astrology should have been the study of ass. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The show used to be called Tweet Street because I'd be diving into Twitter, picking apart different opinions and critiquing them. But ever since Elon Musk changed Twitter's name to X, I've been wondering whether I should call it X Street and make it sound like a porno, or just leave it as is, or include threads. But the drill is still pretty much the same. You can contribute to the making of these episodes by submitting the tweets that you find to be particularly interesting enough to discuss. And the drill on how to do it is pretty simple, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, if it ended up on a reel or a part of someone's carousel, then the place to send it to is @BreakTime on Westside. The DMs are always open, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, I have a couple of cases that I do need to get into, and I will get to them in just a bit. But before I move into anything else, I actually wanted to talk about something real quick. Now, over the past weekend, actually it was last Saturday from the time this episode comes out, I actually went for a podcasting workshop that was set up by Spotify. And it was actually pretty interesting, like meeting new podcasters, people who've been in the game for a little bit, also interacting with quite a number of people who didn't know about the podcast, as well as one or two people who did. And it was great getting to know some of you, Wendy, Washu. It was amazing meeting you guys. I love how some of the podcasts are even winning awards. And to each and every one of you guys that I met, it was absolutely a pleasure. And I do look forward to collaborating in the future. Now, with that said and done, I need to get the show on the road, and before I get into the tweet cases, there was a clip that was shared on Twitter which involved the artist known as Cam Cardinale busy talking about sex and how apparently men lose energy when they have sex and why apparently that's a bad thing. Now, I do know that there's some guys who talk about this in some way or another, and I don't entirely agree with what they say. But before I can give my thoughts on it, let me have the clip play, then I can give my thoughts on the entire thing. So, without further ado...
Alafu, another thing men don't understand ni nini. Ukihave sex na dem, wendo una losing energy. Wendo unampatia energy. That's why unasikia men hawafai kufanya nini? Hawafai kudinya before enda kucheza futa. Lakini dem akidinya alafu ende meeting, ana glow. Asa ikipata wewe ni kama mimi, budo umemwaga kwa sura. Yo kumwaga kwa sura mimi na skincare.
Okay, so can I say that I agree with this? To be honest, no. The guy isn't actually right, but I get exactly why he's saying what he's saying. Like, this actually falls under a certain form of bro science, if I can call it that, because this is stuff that a lot of people have said. Now, granted, I can get why a lot of guys would believe whatever it is that he's saying, or, you know, more or less the same general advice in regards to it, but it's not entirely true. Now, what he is talking about, the whole, oh, you know, men lose energy when they have sex and everything, and why apparently sports players and footballers will not have sex before a game, isn't entirely wrong, but it's not very right. Now, the mentality around that whole belief system of not having sex and conserving your energy has been something that's been said quite a bit, especially in past years, but over time and with research has been disproved, but it's a belief that a lot of people have had. The NoFap community builds itself based on such beliefs. For those of y'all that don't know what the NoFap community is about, it's mostly anti-masturbation for mostly guys. But it is a belief system that's been held by older coaches. It's a belief system that Steve Jobs had. Steve Jobs used to believe in the term coitus interruptus, which normally I use for pull-out, but for him it would be you go, you have sex, then when you get to the climax, you pull out, but you don't nut. Otherwise, you'll lose your creativity. Now, granted, he was the guy behind the iPhone, so I really can't say that the guy, you know, was entirely wrong about that. But from a sports perspective, or at least from an athletic perspective, I can disprove whatever the hell is being said. Now, a big chunk of the reason why footballers, why a lot of athletes, especially even boxers, were being told not to have sex for even up to 6 weeks before they would have a match is mainly because of testosterone, because they believed, or at least a lot of the coaches believed, that if you were to have sex, your testosterone levels would plummet and you wouldn't be as ferocious and you wouldn't have as much strength. Now, that belief has been disproved by modern day science, because people have conducted studies that have shown that after having sex, your testosterone levels do plummet, but they sort of come back up fairly quickly, you know, in like a couple of hours to maybe even a couple of days or two. But for the most part, if you want your highest level of testosterone, that will be after about 6-7 days. After that, it comes back down to normal level because your body likes to be efficient and doesn't like having too much of one thing that's not really being used. So for the most part, that is actually very disprovable. So, for any one of those guys who's like, you get to be super strong if you don't have sex for like weeks on end, like your testosterone level is just gonna go back to normal. And in terms of energy, like I feel like most guys usually just feel that loss of energy for two things. One, because guys do like 90% of the work in the bedroom. Like they'll be the ones that are carrying the babe, that are doing a lot of the pumping. A lot of babes actually don't really put in that much energy or effort into it. And as a result, afterwards you finish, you're tired. And so you might not feel like you have enough energy to go and do a bunch of other things during the day. Then the second reason for it is actually more hormonal than it is, like physical. After you have sex as a guy, normally there's certain hormones that are released either during sex or right after sex, which will make a guy feel more tired and even sleepy. And I think one of them, if I'm not wrong, is prolactin, which is a hormone that helps with anxiety relief and stress relief, and can in some cases, actually in a lot of cases, make you sleepy. So you can feel like you're low on energy after sex. But the reality of it is, and this is something I was told by a sex therapist, you can actually train yourself out of that sort of feeling where it's like after you have sex, you still have the energy to carry on throughout the day. If you did it, probably at the beginning of the day or some point during the day, and you have a bunch of other shit you need to do. So long story short, whatever the hell's being said here is a bunch of bro science. And in this particular case, in terms of the research that's out there, is a massive stack of bull. And also, fun fact, guys also have a glow up after sex, so maybe he decided to gloss over that or he just didn't know. Either way, with that said, I think I do need to get into the tweets real quick. So, on to our very first case of this episode. Now, it was a man who was busy talking about something controversial. So he says, and I quote, "I know it is a controversial thing to say, but in the current economic situation in Kenya, my advice to the youth will be, 1. Do not start a family if you haven't. Do not marry. 2. Do not get children now, and if you must, not more than 1. 3. Starting side hustles is now a matter of urgency. If you don't have one, you are living extremely dangerously. 4. Acquire a valuable skill ASAP, such as coding, etc. You may need it soon." End quote. Now, looking at this tweet here, do I actually agree with it? To be honest, it depends on the advice. Now, the first one, which was do not start a family if you haven't, and do not marry, I will say that depends on your definition of a family. But in terms of not marrying, I'd say that that's actually not very good advice. Mostly because if you think about marriage in today's day and age, it actually has the capability to reduce your costs rather than increase them. And let me just explain it like this. If you have two working class adults and they agree that they're going to contribute, not necessarily equally, but they're both going to contribute towards the bills and whatever it is that they're going to do together, then at the end of the day, your costs actually go down quite a bit. Also, and I could be wrong about this one, so you might have to confirm, if you guys actually have a joint account, if I'm not wrong, the both of you can be taxed as a single individual and not as two people when the money checks in. So, that could also be a benefit as well. But like I said, I could be wrong about that. So in terms of the do not marry, I think that one isn't entirely right. I think it's only a problem if only one side gets to be the breadwinner and the other side isn't really supplementing with that income as well. Now, the second piece of advice, which says do not get children now, and if you must, not more than one, I can't entirely say whether it's good or bad because, bigger picture, global level, it's not good, but on an individual level, it's not bad advice. Like, not getting children is pretty good for a lot of people right now because, with the current economy, shit is hard. Getting a kid just makes your costs astronomically higher. And I have listened to young fathers busy talking about buying shit for kids and it reinforces my decision to pull out the entire time. But if you are going to have kids for the sake of, the global population growth curves and everything, then maybe having more than one kid is probably a little bit more beneficial. Because, our global population will start to plummet at some point, especially if for every 2 people, 1 child is going to be produced. We're going to have a lot fewer young people than older people, and that might cause a bit of a population crisis very, very soon in the future. But, that's entirely up to you if you care about that. Then 3, starting side hustles is now a matter of urgency. Is that really the case? Okay, yes, I think everyone should have something that they do on the side to give them a little bit of extra money here and there, but the most important thing is financial management. There's some people that make a lot of money from one profession as opposed to 2, so them getting a side hustle might not really be that helpful if they don't know how to manage their finances properly. And 4, acquire a valuable skill. That one is particularly true. I think we should all acquire a valuable skill that isn't entirely related to what it is that we do, just in case the industry or that particular profession runs obsolete, we have something else that we can fall back on. But all in all, out of all of this advice, it actually doesn't seem particularly controversial. I see nothing controversial in this, maybe besides the whole idea of not marrying, which I think is even less controversial today, considering that there's a shit ton of people that talk about not doing it and how bad and how scammy it is. But either way, I could be wrong about either one of those. I am very welcoming to criticism on that, but I will leave it at that and move it on to our very next tweet. Now, this one is actually a quoted reply from someone who said something in relation to old men. And the original tweet said, and I quote, "I have worked on old men in their 70 plus and women in their 70 plus. Most men in their 70s I have seen coming to the hospital are always alone, forgotten and sad. Be it poor or rich, most of them are always without anyone to take care of them. The truth is, men die alone and it's sad. Old women, on the other hand, will be escorted by over 3+ caretakers, daughters, sons, grandsons and granddaughters, even on just outpatient visits. This old man came for surgery only with his belongings. We had to probe until a daughter came around. And if you gave birth to only boys, it's worse. Let's learn to take care of our fathers." End quote. Now, the quoted reply on this one, which I actually liked quite a bit, was, and I quote, "As men, we also need to be present in our children's lives. So many men are bad fathers and unpresent, and their kids want nothing to do with them when they get older. They expect their kids to take care of them when all they did was hurt them. Hopefully, my generation does better." End quote. Now, real talk on this one, and this is mostly me speaking out of my ass, so you don't have to believe me. I personally believe that provided that you are present in your child's life and you actually try to be an active part of your child's life, you will never in your old age be left alone by your children or child, since some people want to have one kid. That is something that I personally believe, because a lot of times you find that the men that are left alone, it's not that the kids didn't care about them or have never ever cared about them. It's because some of those men were just absolute assholes to their kids, or they treated their kids like shit, or they just never really wanted to be a part of the kid's life, which is very unfortunate because those are things that matter to my generation, later stage millennials or just millennials in general, and the later stages as opposed to the past ones. Now, with the past generations, you were supposed to take care of your parents almost no matter what. Your parents birthed you, they brought you onto this earth, you have to take care of them as they get older and shit. And a lot of people and a lot of cultures, at least in this part of the world, viewed it as a mandatory thing. You had to do it because you were their child, and it's your duty to take care of them when they're old. But now that we're in this day and age where it's more of a choice than anything, you're finding that if you treated your kids like shit in their younger years and now they're grown right now, then there's a pretty good chance that instead of treating you like shit, they will just go all silent on you and forget that you ever exist. Which is very unfortunate, but at the end of the day, I do think a certain sense of duty is good, but also being present in your children's lives so that they don't feel like they have to do it because it's a duty is probably a hell of a lot better than them having to do it because it is their duty. But Then again, like I said, speaking out of my ass, don't have enough information or experience on this, so you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But either way, I will leave it at that and move it on to our very final case of this episode. And it is a tweet from a lady who says, and I quote, "Can I be real? I've been married for 5 years and it is easily the hardest thing I've ever done. Those who have had easy marriages may be tempted to see this and assume that there must be something deeply wrong with those who struggle, but I'd like to humbly push back on this. I also wonder how many people who say marriage is easy married someone similar to them. Marriage to your polar opposite is hard. You have to constantly work to understand each other. You have to constantly work to communicate love and to recognize when love is being communicated to you. You often find yourself just avoiding talking altogether because the stress of trying to understand each other is too much. Your interests are vastly different. Even if you share the same life goals, your ways of reaching those goals are dissimilar. You relate to money differently, you relate to social events differently. You don't mean to, but every conversation becomes a debate because you rarely come smoothly to the same conclusions. Your sense of humor is different, everything is different. All the while, both parties can be loving and faithful and committed to making it work. It's still hard. If someone says marriage is hard, don't assume their spouse is abusive, manipulative, lazy, etc. Don't assume they're just immature. There's often more at play." End quote. Now, there's quite a number of people that were saying that this woman is just in an unhealthy marriage. Now, some other people, maybe even from my camp, could possibly say that this sounds like someone who was in an arranged marriage, so they didn't really get to know the person. Personally, I just think marriage involves a lot of labor and people don't really talk about that shit. Mostly because when you hear people talking about marriage, they talk about marriage on one end like it's like passing Go in Monopoly, so it's a stage you have to go through. With other people, they talk about marriage like it's this blissful thing. Actually, most women talk about marriage, but most of the time they're just referring to the wedding and the possibility of being with someone that is great to them for, happily ever after or some shit. But people rarely ever talk about marriage in its realistic sense. And marriage involves quite a bit of labor. And you have to put in a lot of work. And in this case, where this woman is saying that these are two different personalities, they have very different ideas of achieving the same goals. Like, I can actually sort of understand that, probably they chose to come together because they shared the same values and they ended up getting married because of that. Now, granted, this is a lot of work, but provided the both of you want to put in the effort to work on it together, then it might not be as hard as some people might think, or as some people might feel. At the end of the day, I think the willingness to make it work will almost always trump the similarities when it comes to it. But then again, I could be wrong about this shit. I could be right. I think I need a married person to tell me if I'm right or wrong. So I want your thoughts on this. The DMs are open on Twitter, or is it X? It is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook and on IG, it is at Breaktime on Westside. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.